بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرضين بأبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعن الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله، اللهم لعنهم جميعا. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لقد كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب. Indeed, in their stories and history was a lesson to be learned for those who are wise. Few nights ago, randomly, I chose two characteristics of Imam Hussein in an attempt to draw attention, particularly for the listeners, that the concept of conflict between haqq and batil is a perpetual and eternal one, and the two camps have to stay. And they have been there from the creation of Adam, and they are going to be there until the end of life. What changes are the major players in each camp. And depending on the characteristics that we possess, the ideals, the aspirations, they would locate us in one camp or another. Once I looked at the two characteristics of ikhlas and assistance to the poor and the needy, immediately it became clear that there were shortcomings not only on a personal level, but also on a social level. And these had to be overcome. As far as the personal level, I started with Tawbah. We really, on a personal level, we cannot begin to change direction if we continue on a path that has led to the failure already. How do we know it has led to the failure? We look at the slogans, the sayings, the sermons of Ahlul Bayt, particularly Imam Hussein on his way from Medina to Mecca and from there to Kufa. Even if we don't want to go back earlier in his life, they make statements that they create modalities for the two camps. and where we locate ourselves become clear. So if we accept that the path that we have led already has not produced anything and it has been futile life, we really, for the change to take place and the direction to be changed, we need to start from repentance. Last night, on a personal level, I cited a hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it exists similar kind of a hadith in other traditions that we have from other holy imams. But that hadith in particular was very graphic in a sense that gave detail of how this personal transformation that starts with the Tawbah, supposed to be the beginning of it, should take place. Number one, a person that wants to change has to reflect on the life that has passed and be regretful of the life that we have led. Number two, a clear decision that you do not intend to go back to the life, to that kind of lifestyle. Number three, you deal with what we call haqqun nas and haqqullah, the right of alaykum salam, the right of people and what belongs to Allah. You can't ask for forgiveness. You can't change direction if the right of people, what you have unjustly taken from people or sinfully disobeyed the command of Allah, just ignore them. No, you have to deal with those and clarify. The account has to be clear before we move forward. You can't carry the debt with you and say they don't exist. These are the two conditions, and then you reflect inwards. And that inner purification, soul searching, physical change, etc., etc. A question that has really been asked repeatedly on various occasions, particularly during Ashura. If the lifestyle that we lead during the year has led us to nowhere, how can we structure the commemoration of Ashura and the majalis that we have? What should be the modality of the lectures, etc., etc., that would help us towards that ultimate change? Nowhere in our history during the year you have an opportunity that so many people will come together for the sake of commemorating or commiserating the event of Ashura. So Ashura literally has the monopoly over collecting people together. How can we use that occasion beneficially? If our lifestyle requires change on a personal as well as on a social level. Nobody denies that the story of Ashura, the whole historical sequence, contains within it emotional concept dimension. Right from a day like the day before yesterday, which was the 2nd of Muharram, where the movement of Imam Hussein has been curtailed and not allowed free movement to move around. Everything that happened between this day and the couple of hours after Salat al-Dhuhr, or the time of noon prayer on the day of Ashura, is full of tragedy. And any tragic event, particularly for us that we say we are the followers of Ahlul Bayt, when you envisage what happens to a 3 years old or even 6-month-old child, where the child is torn to pieces literally, you have to have a heart of steel or rock not to react emotionally to the story. Emotion is part of it because tragedy is part of the story. The problem is that we call it the existential question, is whether we should rely purely on the emotional and the tragic dimension of the whole story, or there is another element within the story that we have to focus on and reach a balance, reach a balance between the two. There is a tendency in most majalis that we organize that we give preference and priority to the emotional aspect. But is it enough? Nobody denies that historically, right from the moment that Imam Hussein was martyred and Ahlul Bayt were martyred, the 72, 80, 100, whatever numbers that the historians claim, definitely not more than 120. The 3 hours after noon of the Ashura, 61 after Hijrah, up to now, various type of commemoration had taken place for this event. The emotional dimension and the style that we organize certainly link us directly to the person. It becomes a personal issue. We react emotionally to a person, to the imam that links us on a personal level. But let's ask ourselves, did he say, during the movement from Medina to Mecca to ultimately Karbala, the statements were personal or what we call grand schema that they laid for us? Any history, any event in history, it has these two issues within it. The characteristics of the major player within that historical event literally has a personal dimension to it that we associate with that individual. Emotional aspect simply links us to the person himself. But if we analyze the statements that they made, they definitely laid the foundation of more general rules that could be applied from one stage to another. The verse that I started at the beginning, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لَأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. The stories that happen in the past, there is something, a lesson that one could learn from these stories if one is wise enough. So the value of history from an Islamic point of view is the lessons that we learn from it. In historiography in the West, history simply becomes a narrative of the past. It's dead. There is no reality to it. But from an Islamic point of view, if you look at the verses in the Holy Quran, encourages people to look to the story of those who came before them. Look at Thamud, look at Ad, look at Fir'aun, look at their social structure. What was it that led to their destruction? Look at those factors. Sunnatullah. This is the absolute rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in society, in human life, in human history. That if you were to repeat, and this is where the expression comes from, if we don't learn from history, we are bound to make the same mistakes all over again. لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لَأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. History teaches us lessons if we are wise enough. So the value of history from an Islamic point of view is the lesson that we learn from it. Yes, it has an emotional dimension, but it's the values, the grand schemas, not the micro concept that leads to emotion, but the macro issues that are laid down as the foundation that we all repeat during Ashura. كل يوم عاشوراء وكل أرض كربلاء. Every day is Ashura and every land could be Karbala. Which means what? It's a metaphor. The metaphor is what happened on the day of Ashura and in the plain of Karbala was the conflict between a manifestation of haqq and batil. Every day there is a perpetual conflict between haqq and batil. Where we stand, how we benefit from these days, how do we develop the methodology for the lectures, for the azaz and so on? Should we focus on emotional issue or on what we call a grand schema issues, more general issues, principle of life that never changes with time? When Imam Hussein says stands the last minute of his life, when he cannot move on, and sitting there, the news comes that the army is moving towards your tent. He uses his sword, leans on it and stands up. Ya Shi'ata ala Abi Sufyan, O Shia of ala Abi Sufyan. In lam yakun lakum deen. Let us assume that you have no belief. Walan takhafun al-ma'ad. And you have no fear of hereafter. Fakunu ahraran fi dunyakum kama taz'amun. Be a free-spirited individual, even if you don't believe in anything. That has nothing to do with Ashura specifically. The context where it was said was Ashura. But the free spirit that deserve what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. The son of Adam, we have given them a degree of dignity. That dignity requires to be free-spirited. That not even when you have nothing to do with faith, alaykum salam. Even when you have nothing to do with faith and belief in the hereafter, you still can live as a free individual. These are part of what we call the grand schema that has nothing to do. Yes, the context was Ashura. It was delivered in Ashura. But what it's meant is to be a general rule. Certainly, if we devoid or detach emotional concept from or emotional components from it, Ashura's, even the general schema, the grand schema, becomes nothing more than dry philosophical proposition. When you contextualize those ideas in the life of the grandson of the Holy Prophet, then it takes a totally different value. And it becomes alive. Ala inna ad-da'i ibn ad-da'i. This is another from Imam Hussein. Ala inna ad-da'i ibn ad-da'i khayyara bayna ithnayn. The so and so has given me two choices. Either capitulate and accept the tyranny of Bani Umayyah or death. Dhilla means indignity. A free-spirited individual that he exemplifies naturally is not going to submit to dhillah and be to the indignity that is required to submit to a person like Yazid, that the day before Imam says, وَإِذَا وُلِيَ الْأُمَّ بِرَاعٍ مِثْلَ يَزِيد فَعَلَى الْإِسْلَامِ السَّلَامِ. You have he has made his position quite clear. Any submission to a person like Yazid is going to be nothing more than indignity for Ahlul Bayt. And he completes, وَهَيْهَاتْ مِنَّا الذِّلَّةِ. We are not free-spirited individuals. Is not going to submit to this indignity. That is the context. مِثْلِي لَا يُبَايِعُ مِثْلَهُ. Those who are like me are not going to submit to people like him. This is a general statement. What he is telling us, that we, Ahlul Bayt, followers of Ahlul Bayt, should be free-spirited and never submit to this kind of Yazid of our days. If we want to live like Hussein, free-spirited in our life. I remember in 2004, I was teaching a class at Cornell School of International Studies on history of Iraq. And naturally, my class required a detailed research of pictures that were coming out of Iraq at the time. This is during the American invasion. I saw a picture that really shook me to the depths. An American soldier with a gun over mausoleum of Imam Hussein, standing up there. And while the Shi'at of Ahlul Bayt were beating their chests downstairs, the yard. Immediately told me that there is something happened within the commiseration, that we really have forgotten or lost the original intention. How can 1.5 million, 2 million Iraqis get together in the yard of the mausoleum, allowing the soldier, the symbol of occupation, to stand on the top of the mausoleum, and we only concentrate or focus, narrow everything, the commiseration, to the beating of the chest and everything. We have forgotten those general statements that's supposed to apply to our life. مثلي لا يبايع مثلي. People who are like me, they are not going to submit to the command of individuals like him. Then he says, again, another statement, من رأى سلطانا جائرا مستحلا لحرام الله مخالفا لسنة رسول الله. And then, if you see anyone, any ruler, corrupt, that is unjust within the society, and what Allah has forbidden, they practice, and they do opposite to what the Sunnah of Rasulullah is, and يَعْمَلُ فِي عِبَادِ اللَّهِ, and practices injustice when it comes to dealing with people, بِالْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ, ثُمَّ لَا يُغَيِّرُ بِقَوْلٍ وَلَا فِعْلٍ كَانَ حَقًّا عَلَى اللَّهِ أَنْ يُدْخِلَهُ مَدْخَلَهُ. Anyone, مَنْ رَأَى, it's a general statement. It sets the context at that time was Ashura. The relationship is between Hussein and Yazid. But the general statement that is made by Imam Hussein is a statement that obligates everyone for the rest of their lives, or obligates all of us for the rest of our lives. That we cannot claim to be the followers of Ahlul Bayt, see tyranny in our life and say nothing. We deserve the same kind of treatment that Allah is going to give to this individual. من رأى سلطانا جائرا مستحلا لحرام الله مخالفا لسنة رسول الله يعمل في عباد الله بالإثم والعدوان ثم لا يغير بقوم ولا فعل كان حقا على الله أن يدخله مدخله. Because we have already read in our stories in the Holy Quran as well, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. Justice is a foundation of all faith. Another verse, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْمِيزَانَ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. Establishment of justice on earth is a prerequisite, the foundation, the cornerstone for any faith to be able to establish itself. These are general statements. So there is a degree of balance that has to be reached when we try to organize our commiseration or commemoration of Ashura. Certainly, we need the emotional component to be present. I remember Marhum Mutahari was my professor in Tehran. Once asked him, somebody asked him about this azadari that we have in our countries. He said the emotional dimension has been able to preserve the history, but it has failed to take the essence of it and deliver it to the other societies. And that's exactly the reality here. If we bring brothers and sisters that are sitting in the back, if you bring people that are thirsty for truth, thirsty for understanding human values, thirsty for understanding the spirit of Islam, to one of our majalis during Ashura, you will fail to convince them that what Islam actually talks about, the issue of justice and injustice. Why? Because what they see is the emotional component alone. And remember, in this society, we have an added responsibility when it comes to tabligh and da'wah from an Islamic point of view, particularly with Ahlul Bayt. Not only we have within our community to educate ourselves as to the best methodology of organizing these lectures, we have other people that we share with them at least some majority of Islamic principles, our brothers within the other madahib, but we have a bigger circle around us that we may share human values with them. And we can take these grand schemas as human value and deliver it to them and show them. Concept of justice, human equity, human dignity, and standing up for injustice, etc., etc. But once they are absent from the program that we organize, there is a fundamental problem. We have done an injustice to Imam Hussein, because he constantly talks about what we call grand values as well as the smaller ones. He tries to depict, to give a picture of the life as it was, but at the same time tries to lay the foundation of the life as it should be. So we have an ideal lifestyle and a real lifestyle. The context talks about the real lifestyle as it used to be, and the whole grand schema talks about the ideal lifestyle that requires struggle, jihad, and so on to be established on earth. ألا إن هذا القوم قد تركوا إطاعة الرحمن ولزموا إطاعة السلطان. Look at them. Again, another conflict between haq, batil. If you look at the people around you, these are people that, remember, if you remember a few nights ago, I discussed this, that in our prioritization, does Allah come first or Allah come second or third? Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. It rejects the notion ألا أن هذا القوم تركوا إطاعة الرحمن, that submission to the command of God and putting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the first priority has been forgotten. It's the other issues that come first. Submission to the command of the leader, etc., becomes first rather than Allah. This is a general rule. If you don't follow the command of Allah, ultimately the social structure becomes corrupt and you will suffer. There is another hadith that it's worth mentioning it. أَأْمُرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَانْهَوْا عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ أَوْ لَسَلَّطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمْ شِرَارَكُمْ فَيَدْعُوا خِيَارَكُمْ فَلَا يُسْتَجَابُ. Amr bil ma'ruf and nahy an al munkar is wajib. Do encourage people to do good deeds and discourage them from bad deeds. Otherwise, if you don't do this, munkar prevails and the worst individuals within the society is going to take control, and the best one within you says, "Oh Lord, mercy," no response. because we brought it on ourselves. When we had the responsibility, we failed to deliver. In any society, a recap of what I have said so far, in any society, first of all, as a base, there is a conflict between haqq and batil all the time. It's nothing new. Where you position yourself, which camp you belong. And naturally, because of these two camps, you're going to have leadership of batil, leadership of haqq. Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. يوم تدعو كل أناس بإمامهم. This story, somebody came to Imam Hussein and said, يا ابن رسول الله أخبرني عن قول الله عز وجل يوم تدعو كل أناس بإمامهم وندعو كل أناس بإمامهم. فقال نعم. للناس إمامان. People have two types of leadership. إمام هدى الذي يدعو ودعا إلى الهدى، وإمام ضلالة دعا إلى ضلال. People have two types of leadership. What we call the ideal, the qualified leader, and the misguided leader. The qualified leader would lead the society towards the right path. The misguided people, Imam, would lead the community or the society towards imperfection and corruption. أدرسوا الإمام الذي تأم المسلمين. Think about the leadership that you have in your society. من خلال سيرته هل هي سيرة هدى أو ضلال. Really, pay attention. Look at their action, not the word that they say. Words are cheap. We have presidents that go to Egypt and other places and pay lip service to Islam, only to come back to this country and order more killing. Words are cheap. Action speaks loud. The framework by which you judge whether Imam or the leader of the community is worthy, on the right path, or leading the community to corruption is what they do. أما الإمام العامل بالكتاب والآخذ بالقسط. You have two types of imams. You either have an imam that the book of God, his life is centered on the book of God, inspired by revelation and by the sunnah, and acts accordingly and works for justice. Then stick to that. And those who go the opposite, try to move away from it. يوم ندعو كل أناس. We bring every society, every group, every social structure with their leaders. Yeah, you have followed X. This is the concept of that the brother asked a few nights ago, the difference between imama and ra'asa, or leadership. That there is a framework that Imam Hussein, in his conversation, in his hadith, lays down. A society, to avoid chaos, yes, in need of leadership, but what type of leadership? And what would be the consequence if we allow and permit the Imam to be corrupt? Imam lays down the two conditions. The worthy leader has to have these two. Anything short of these two, not worthy. First, that the Imam has to be fully qualified and living example of the law. And this comes out of a number of hadith that I have repeatedly stated. إِنَّ مَثَلَ أَهْلِ بَيْتِي كَمَثَلَ سَفِينَةِ نُوحٍ. They exemplify the law. When the Holy Prophet says the only way for najat and success is to follow them because they are the most qualified. This is the first example. And number two, to feel for the pain of the people. If you look at the Holy Quran, there are a number of verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the Holy Prophet and says, we know the pain in your heart for the people that are living around you. We understand how you feel, how you are in pain when these people are misguided. So these two, again, falls within what we call the grand schemas. A person or persons or leaders that really care less about the population, they don't deserve to be our leaders. And the persons that are ill-equipped to understand Islam and their life does not represent the ideals of Islam, they are not the manifestation of the spirit of Islam. There is a dichotomy between what they practice and what they state, a contradiction. They do not fall within the two criteria that Imam Hussein has laid down for the leadership. On the personal level, we have to change. On a social structure, again, we have to change. And this is the place that we can organize both of them, where the emotional aspect lays the foundation for personal contact and personal relationship with Ahlul Bayt. And analyzing and understanding these grand principles that are laid down for our life becomes the fundamental issue that we can use for social change. How do we change our society? Every year you have opportunities during the month of Muharram, Safar, and in other occasions, simply gravitate towards the center automatically. You don't need even to call them. You only need to put a black flag outside and people feel free to come in. Use the opportunity. Don't focus on emotion only. Because the history of Karbala is a mix between, and by the way, if you look at the history, the first martyr or remembrance, Ahlul Bayt try to explain the concept of true Imam. They don't talk about the emotion. Very little is said. Imam says, okay, the person who is a poet, can you recite a poem about Karbala? The person. But Imam uses that poem to break up the relationship that exists in the society and the social structure at the time. Where is haq? Where is batil? In case people are misguided or they don't know about the truth. So let's balance the two. Always keep these two emotional aspects and the intellectual part, the grand schema part, the general rules that existed, like a message in the in the Imam's statement. Break them down and see how we can use these to change our social structure. Inshallah, tomorrow night I'm going to focus on where do we go once we change ourselves on a personal level. How do we go towards the social change, which is ultimately the one that has power to change this world. But before I finish, I need to clarify a few things, but even before it, I have been asked to ask everyone, brothers and sisters, we have at least one and possibly more sick individuals that they really need our dua and everyone's dua. So here I would like to ask everyone to join me in reciting Alaykum Assalam wa Rahmatullah. To recite Amman Yujib 5 times, and please keep them in your mind and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for their speedy shafa and recovery, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Amman yujibu al-muttarra idha da'ah wa yakshifu as-su'. Amman yujibu al-muttarra idha da'ah wa yakshifu as-su'. Amman yujibu al-muttarra idha da'ah wa yakshifu as-su'. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. Ilahi, O Lord, we ask you to give them speedy recovery, and we beseech you, be Ahl al-Bayt, that we have come together here to commemorate and commiserate the pain that they went through. Inshallah, God will give them shafa. Then last night, during the question and answer session, I pointed out, and think the brother asked as well, this notion of the possession and ownership. At the time, I did not have the time to elaborate. The concept of possession and ownership, we are used in here in a capitalistic structure to something where possession and ownership to be synonymous with each other. But Islam sees the life on earth to be a transient life. Because it's a transient life, everything that comes on this, you gain within this transient life, has no permanency. Anything that you spend that comes to be registered under your name, when you go to the permanent life, then truly that becomes your what you have owned. Otherwise here, because of the intransient life and the non-permanency of the lifestyle, everything is going, you are not going to take it with you. It's the worldview that has, that because this life is transient, the hereafter is the permanent one. So ownership registers over there, where you have your hand over there, not over here. That's the difference between here, the capitalist system. We have learned that the two are the same. They are synonymous. Because they do not see the role of the hereafter to play anything within the equation. Naturally, this is it. This is what you have. You possess it, you own it, and then you waste it or you throw it away, whatever it is, finished. Islam says no. Here is a temporary life, a transient lifestyle. You gain it, you're holding it in your hand. If you don't spend it, if you don't use it in a way that registers over there, then you have not been the owner of it. You simply have been holder or the possessor. There was a slight confusion as well, what the brother asked me regarding the absence of the role model for the youth within the community. I said, if you look at the age, those who are 50 and below, they miss the presence of the Holy Prophet, because they were born after the Holy Prophet's death. And those who were 40 and below, literally, will be around the beginning of Uthman's period, that they were born. And from then until 60th after Hijrah, the role model for them were nothing but corrupt individuals within the society. The brother asked me whether I was exonerating the failure for them. No, I wasn't. I wasn't giving them the excuse. The absence of the role model, I wasn't trying to say that the absence of the role model somehow justifies what they did. What I was trying to point out, that the absence of the role model plays a role in being, to a degree, misguidedness that some of the youth had. But they really didn't understand the concept of imamah. It doesn't mean that the free will has been removed away from them and somehow they become robotically manipulated by the system. No, they still had the free will, the choice. The imams may not have had the physical leadership, but still they were around within the community and they provided guidance. You could have gone to them. The fact that you were in a society and the presence of corrupt leaders, Quran says on the Day of Judgment there will be individuals that they say, and the Malaika or the angels are going to ask them, why didn't you behave well? Well, we were in a society that did not allow us to practice. Alam takun ardullahi wasi'a. Moved away. If you can't change the environment, don't allow yourself to be subject of change dictated by the environment. This is the beauty, the dynamics that exist within Islam. We have to change the environment as much as we can. The absence of the guidance is not a justification of the negation of that responsibility. The best when it becomes paralyzing. This is the concept of hijrah. When it becomes paralyzing that you can't do anything, alam takun ardullahi wasi'a, you could go somewhere else and be. So the presence of the corrupt leaders, we have to admit that they have an influence on the tarbiyah and the upkeep of children and the youth. And this is why I was trying to ask last night that in our preparation, be mindful of the type of leadership that we try to have in our society, whether from our own family life, which becomes the foundation of social change from an Islamic point of view, that inshallah tomorrow we will discuss, because social structure is nothing more than individual pieces that come together. And these are the family life. That miniature scale of that ultimately, when they are put together, a social structure is made. So the presence or the control of the corrupt leadership should not be interpreted that the life suddenly changed, free will is no longer there, and I am become predestined to work or navigate myself between corrupt leaders. No, you can change. If the system doesn't allow you, you can go somewhere else where you can change the environment that you live. Any questions before we finish tonight? Go ahead.
You were mentioning about recognizing the Yazid of your time. Living in this society and in the times that we're living in, there are many examples that we find within our communities where the backing is coming from pretty much Taghut of the time. How do we differentiate, and what's our responsibility as the follower of Al-Bayt al-Islam to make sure to raise awareness of such centers or places, and like how do we as a community deal with it?
You see, once we have accepted that the conflict between Haqq and Batil, between Yazid mindset and Hussein mindset is perpetual. It goes on. So in every time and era, and this is why I mentioned that we have a statement that says Kulla Ardan Karbala or Kulla Yawmin Ashura. It refers a reference to this conflict. To this conflict. Where we locate and how do we deal with it is our responsibility. Where do we locate ourselves and how we deal with it depends on whether we recognize the source of pain and corruption in our time, and we position ourselves. Number one is to stand against injustice in any shape or form, wherever it comes from. Because ultimately, this notion of justice and social equilibrium is the foundation of the entire, what we call general schemas that were developed by all A'imah. They all stood. The methodology might have been different, but because of that perpetual conflict, the essence, the political structure and position that they took was the same. So now it is our turn. تلك أمة قد خلت لها ما كسبت ولكم ما كسبت. They played a role during their own time. They made history. At this particular time, we are the ones that have to make history. And the only way we can do it, we can't boast about the success and the victories of the past forever. Yes, we learn from it. But now we have our own responsibility. Martin Luther King once, in one of the speeches that he gave during the civil rights movement, he said, forget about Jesus and the story of Jesus. Be the Jesus of your time yourself. Now, if we use that as a metaphor, we have occasions in which we talk, how many people are here? We talk about Imam Hussein. Yes, there are things that we can learn from his uprising, his revolution, etc., etc., messages and so on. But once we understand that this conflict is a perpetual conflict, who is the Yazid of the time and who is the Hussein of the time, and what are our responsibilities towards these two conflicting and contrasting positions? That is something that I'm asking to add to the emotional dimension that we could learn from these majalis. If we constantly use the emotional component without looking at these factors, we will be ignorant. We come out, we go home, continue with the same life, and the Yazid of the time continues with his or her life. I think to give time to Samahat Shaikh to get organized, just end it here. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.